Welcome to The Faithful Steward. This is a podcast all about sharing biblical wisdom and practical insights in order to help church leaders pursue and teach financial freedom as part of Christian discipleship. We believe this is a spiritual conversation, and this is a place where the church needs to lead the way in order to move our communities forward in how we steward God's resources. I'm your host, James Lenhoff, and I am so passionate about this conversation and helping leaders have the confidence to step into it. We believe that if we help people thrive financially and grow spiritually, it changes everything. And I am so excited to join you on this journey. This podcast is brought to you by Good Sense. If you'd like more information about what we're up to, you can go to our website at goodsensemovement.org. All right, let's get started with today's conversation. Today we continue our conversation about teaching kids about money, and we're going to get really practical today. So this is going to be a lot of blocking and tackling kind of conversation around what to do and how to do it. And this is just my experience. It's what we tend to recommend at Good Sense in terms of how to make this a practical, tangible experience for kids rather than a theoretical conversation all the time. And so one of the questions we get that is most important to answer right away is when? When do we start teaching kids about money? Generally, my answer is now. Whatever age your kid is, it's a great time to start. If you have waited and your kids are older, get started now. If your kids are really young and you're like, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal and they don't really understand things, so we'll just wait, go ahead and get started now anyway. The sooner we get started, the more normal the idea of money is, the more familiar it is, the less intimidating it becomes, and the sooner we can give our kids access to decision-making autonomy and give them a chance to make mistakes. We need to give our kids an opportunity to mess this up. I want my kids to make as many mistakes as possible before they leave my house. Because when we give them access to mistakes, we give them access to learning. Failure is the learning process. So often parents get this backwards. They wait. They protect their kids from money. They just make all their decisions for them. And so if you're in the grocery store and your kid says, buy me that useless piece of plastic, and you know that thing's going to break in the car on the way home, so you say, no, we're not going to buy that. It's a waste of money. I'm not wasting my money on that thing. And all we've been teaching our kids in that example is you are not able to make your own decisions, and you just need to rely on me to protect you from these mistakes. And so you don't have any authority over this. I have all the authority. And I am not saying that parents should not have authority. That's fine. What I'm saying is when we are blocking the mistake, we are blocking all of the learning. You know, the way that I illustrate this is by talking about how we teach our kids to walk. We don't teach them how to walk by lecturing them about gravity and talking about physics or giving them a book that shows how the joints and the muscles work. They learn how to walk by falling over and over and over again. And money is the same thing. It's experiential. It's not mathematical. As much as we like to think that these are all math issues, they're mostly emotional and spiritual and heart issues. And those are only things we learn through trial and error and mistakes and pain and growth. So the kid that's learning how to walk is falling, but they're only falling a very short distance. If we protect our kid from ever having any risk of falling until they're in college and they're 6 foot tall, and that's when they start to learn, they'll hurt themselves when they fall. But if we teach them very young, if we let them try when they're really small and they fall, it doesn't even bother them. Those mistakes are easy to recover from. Again, money is the same thing. We want them to make mistakes that involve $5 instead of $5,000. They're the same mistakes, but we might as well make them early. And so we want to start now. We want the next generation to be familiar with money, to be comfortable with it, to be confident in their understanding of it. And that is not going to come through us lecturing. It's going to come through us giving them access to experiencing it itself. Let's talk about starting at a really early age. What do we do? Right off the bat, we want to start with some way for them to understand money, to have it, to touch it, to be able to identify it, and also to see it accumulate. And so that traditional idea of a piggy bank, I like to particularly have things that are clear, that are see-through, so that kids can see it actually building. If it's inside of an actual piggy bank that's not see-through, they may be able to shake it, but they can't really see what's happening when they put money into it. So even at very, very young ages, we're talking toddler kind of age, giving them access to the visual experience, the tactile experience of money, and being able to save it, put it in that piggy bank, showing them that feeling, that experience of actually having resources. Because I say all the time, the hardest part about money is the having of it. Just letting it sit there, not getting in its way, not immediately thinking of the 1,000 different things we can do with it, literally just letting it be. And we need to give our kids access to that sooner rather than later. And so the piggy bank is a great starting point for really young kids to start to experience those things. Very early on, then, we want to start setting an allowance. I am a big fan of giving kids an allowance that is based on their age per week. So if they're 5 years old, they get $5 a week. If they're 6 years old, they get $6 a week. Every birthday, they get a raise. And every week, they're getting a deposit in what I like to call the bank of mom and dad. And in that bank, we are depositing their allowance and allowing them to start to have access to their own decision making, to start to decide for themselves how they're going to use these resources. Now, while that's happening, we as a family are talking about God's resources. We're talking about stewardship. We're talking about what it looks like for us to recognize God's ownership of everything. And so they're getting this language, this awareness of stewardship, while they're also starting to get their own decision-making autonomy. And that is a beautiful mix where they can start to hear the message of selflessness and stewardship and responsibility to the owner, while also having the ability to be selfish and making decisions that are about just their own delight and enjoyment. And they need to figure out how to wrestle with that. We need to actually give them the ability to do that. If we're making all the decisions for them and quote unquote forcing them into selflessness, right? We're saying we're not going to buy that because we're giving money to the poor. Well, that didn't cost them anything other than they didn't get to have fun or buy the thing they wanted. It's a very different experience when it's their own money and they're having to choose between those things. When we make those decisions for them, it really actually isn't as valuable as we think it is. And so we want them to actually have the ability to step into some selfishness, to be exposed to those decisions. And so now when we're in the grocery store and the kid says, I want that useless piece of plastic, well, you have money. What do you want to do? And then they buy with their own money that useless piece of plastic. And we all know it's going to break. And we all know on the way home it's going to be a piece of garbage. We're going to throw it away as soon as we pull in the garage. We all see it coming. But they won't learn unless it costs them something. Buyer's remorse is the Yoda of finance. Buyer's remorse is the most effective teacher. It only kicks in when I am losing something of mine and it was a waste. If I waste your money, it doesn't actually cost me anything other than maybe you shame me or tell me that I should have listened to you or, something like that. That's not the same as when it actually costs me something. And so if we buy that useless piece of plastic with our money and it breaks on the way home and then we tell our kids, see, I told you so, we are not actually teaching them anything other than to be afraid. But when we actually give them access to spend their own resources on the thing they want to do, and it breaks on the way home, we don't have to say, I told you so. We can actually engage in a really beautiful conversation to say, oh, what happened there? What did we learn? What did you notice about that process? What did the packaging tell you that it would do that it didn't do? How did it disappoint you? What specifically could we look for in the future that might indicate that it's not going to be as valuable or as delightful or enjoyable as we hoped? We can start to give them access to that learning without us having to lecture them or shame them. We can actually discover it together. And it's so much more powerful and profound when they learn it themselves. One of the questions that we get a lot is how? How do we actually do this mechanically? And I used to keep the Bank of Mom and Dad as a spreadsheet when my kids were younger. And I would go in and make entries of when they withdrew money to buy something and when I added money for their allowance. And that was really complicated. There is an app that I highly recommend called Greenlight. It is an excellent app where you can actually get your kid a debit card. You put the money in automatically. You assign the allowance to each of your kids based on their age if you want to, or whatever amount you want to put in there. And then it will allow them to use that debit card to spend as they want to. If they have a phone or a tablet, they can have that app on their tablet or their phone that tells them what's in their account. They can pay attention to it, but it automates all this for you. It will automatically put the money in the account. It'll automatically credit interest that you pay. So the Bank of Mom and Dad pays interest on saving. And that's one of our most powerful tools. Is we need to make sure that our kids learn that saving is powerful. If the only experience we give our kids is a passbook savings account at a bank that's making 0.0 something horrible in interest, then the only thing they learn through experience is after saving all of my money for the last 6 months, I've got 5 cents of interest and saving is stupid. It's not very effective. It's not powerful. It's boring. And I would have had so much more fun if I'd have just spent all that money. And so when we give them access to the experience of a really disappointing saving process, they're going to be motivated to spend instead of save. But the Bank of Mom and Dad, in our case, at the Lenhoff household, the Bank of Mom and Dad pays 10% interest. And that is automated through Greenlight. It automatically credits it. It takes it out of our account and puts it into their account. It's a really slick system that allows that rate that they're making to be significant, to be really motivating and powerful. They're watching their savings grow and they're incentivized to save. They're experiencing something that shows them the power of compounding interest, and they actually then have a reason to not just spend recklessly. And so those are some of the components that are really important to the Bank of Mom and Dad concept. We want our kids to have spending authority. They get to decide what they do with their money. We want them to make reasonable, significant interest that incentivizes them to save. And we want to have open conversations about money as they're figuring this out together and making mistakes. We don't want to punish them or chastise them. We want to learn with them and invite them into discovery, almost like we're in a sandbox, figuring this out and playing together. The next layer of this process is that you instill in your kids the 10-10-80 process. 10% of their money goes to savings, 10% goes to giving, and 80% is what they get to spend on needs and wants. The sooner we start to build into their system the mindset of this limiting of our spending, that there is a giving component automatically, there is a saving component automatically, the sooner that just becomes embedded in their default thought, the sooner they start to recognize that you can live within those limitations comfortably. If we don't put those restrictions in place, we don't set up some way for that to happen automatically, they will spend everything and think that that's what money is for. What we don't want them to learn in this process is that money is just for buying everything I want. As they grow, we want to inject needs. So as they get older, one of the things my kids had to do as they got older is they have to buy their own shoes. Or maybe we decide they're ready for a cell phone and they are wanting to have a cell phone. They have to buy it. They have to save up for it. And they have to decide to buy a used one instead of a new one because they can save some money. Like we start to give them access to this experience of trade-offs. and they are using their own money to buy these things that they need and these things that they want, and they have to recognize that those things have to fit within that 80% of what they're getting. And so as they're able to get their first job and they're earning more money, we inject some more responsibility. So yes, now you have your first job. Now you have to pay for all of your gas. And you have your income coming in. You have to cover your insurance for your car. We start to just give them more and more responsibility over time in stages so that it's not all at once and it's not a surprise. We can ease into it, but we're not giving them this experience of money always being for once. We have to show them that there are trade-offs in life while we're talking about, like we talked last week, while we're talking about that as a family, how we are stewarding our family's experience of resources that God has given us to manage. That's a conversation. Trade-offs are part of that discussion as well, but we actually need to give our kids access to their own trade-offs in order for them to really know what that feels like. Think about some of those things that are recurring, regular expenses, things like adding a line to your cell phone plan for them. Give them that responsibility of paying for that $10 a month. Right? We're giving them this experience of recurring things they have to plan for. We're giving them the experience of unexpected things that they have to be prepared for. Maybe they get a speeding ticket. That's on them, right? We start to give them some of those responsibilities as they come, and they start to really get nimble at being able to adjust to absorb those kinds of things. The sooner we give them that experience, the better they will be at it when those numbers get big. I want them to have to figure that out with $10 or $5, because when that exercise involves a comma, and we're talking about $5,000 or $1,000, it's the same exercise. It's the same process of trade-offs. It just involves more zeros. But mentally, they are really good at it by then because they've been trained to do it. They've been used to it by then. It's familiar. This is the process. It is a training ground. And I want us to think of it that way. We want our kids to make mistakes, to grow, to run into walls and really screw this up, when really screwing it up looks like falling from 6 inches off the ground, right? We want them to make tons of $5, $10, even $50 mistakes, as many as they need to make in order to learn. That's only going to happen if we give them the ability to make those decisions that will lead to those mistakes, even if we see them coming. It is the biggest head start and advantage we can give our kids by not protecting them from those mistakes. As ironic and counterintuitive as that seems, it's true. It is the most powerful path to our kids stepping into faithful stewardship early and then staying faithful stewards for the long run. Well, thank you so much for listening to the Faithful Steward podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and other information that we mentioned in today's episode. Also, be sure to check out our website at goodsensemovement.org to get all the resources we offer churches to help equip them in teaching financial stewardship to their community. If you have any questions or any topics you want to make sure we cover on our show, you can email me at jameslenhoff@goodsensemovement.org. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you all have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.